The America's Got Talent stage was buzzing with its usual electric energy as the evening's auditions prepared to reach their climax. It was a warm October evening in 2024, and Simon Cowell sat in his familiar position at the judges' table, black t-shirt immaculate despite the long day. His expression carried that particular brand of controlled enthusiasm that had made him one of television's most recognizable figures. After decades in the entertainment industry and countless auditions, Simon thought he had seen every possible combination of talent, drama, and surprise that could walk onto his stage. He was about to discover how profoundly wrong he was. 16-year-old Sarah Mitchell stood in the wings, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched a worn manila envelope against her chest. She was a striking teenager with dark brown hair that fell in waves past her shoulders and piercing blue eyes that seemed to hold secrets far beyond her years. She wore a simple black dress that looked carefully chosen but not expensive, and around her neck hung a small silver locket that she kept touching nervously. What the audience and cameras couldn't see was the DNA test results folded carefully inside that envelope. Results that would change everything. Sarah had spent months planning this moment, working with a private investigator and gathering evidence that would either validate or destroy the story she had been told her entire life. Born Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell at St. Mary's Hospital in London 16 years ago, she had been raised in the British foster care system after being abandoned as an infant. Her only clue to her identity was a note left with her that read, "Her father is someone important who cannot acknowledge her. Please keep her safe until someday she can find him herself." Ladies and gentlemen, Terry Crews announced with his characteristic energy, "Our next contestant is 16-year-old Sarah Mitchell from London, England." The audience applauded as Sarah walked onto the stage, her movements carefully controlled despite her obvious nervousness. Simon immediately noticed her poise and the way she carried herself with a dignity that seemed familiar, though he couldn't place why. "Hello, Sarah," Simon said warmly, his British accent carrying that hint of paternal warmth he often showed to young contestants. "Welcome to AGT. You've traveled quite a distance to be here. What brings you all the way from London to our stage?" Sarah adjusted the microphone and looked directly at Simon with those piercing blue eyes. For just a moment, something flickered across Simon's face, a recognition he couldn't quite identify, like seeing a stranger who reminded him of someone from long ago. "Thank you, Mr. Cowell," Sarah said, her voice clear and strong despite her nervousness. "I'm here because I have a story to tell, and I believe this is the only stage in the world where that story might reach the person who needs to hear it." The cryptic nature of her response immediately caught the attention of all four judges. Heidi Klum leaned forward with interest. "That sounds intriguing, Sarah. What kind of story are you going to tell us?" Sarah clutched her envelope tighter. "I'm going to sing a song I wrote myself. It's called Father's Shadow, and it's about searching for someone who doesn't know you exist." Simon felt an odd chill run down his spine. Something about Sarah's direct gaze, the shape of her eyes, even the way she tilted her head when she spoke, was triggering memories he couldn't quite access. "That's a very mature theme for someone your age," Sofia Vergara observed. "Is this song based on personal experience?" "Yes," Sarah replied simply. "It's about growing up knowing that half of your identity is missing, and wondering if the person you're searching for would even want to be found." Howie Mandel, sensing the emotional weight behind Sarah's words, spoke gently. "Sarah, can you tell us a little about your background? About your family?" Sarah's grip on the envelope tightened visibly. "I don't have a family in the traditional sense. I've been in foster care my entire life. I was abandoned as a baby with only a note saying that my father was someone important who couldn't acknowledge me." The studio fell silent, and Simon felt something twist in his chest. The combination of Sarah's story and those hauntingly familiar features was creating an uncomfortable recognition that he couldn't quite place. "Sarah," Simon said carefully, "what made you decide to come to AGT with this story?" This was the moment Sarah had been preparing for her entire life. She looked directly at Simon, and when she spoke, her voice carried a strength that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her 16 years. "Because Mr. Cowell, I believe my father might be someone in the entertainment industry, someone who might be watching this show, someone who might recognize something about me if he sees me perform." Simon's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Around him, the other judges were clearly moved by Sarah's story, but Simon was experiencing something different, a growing unease that had nothing to do with sympathy, and everything to do with a terrible, impossible suspicion. "Well," Simon said, his voice slightly tighter than usual, "let's hear your song then. I'm sure whoever your father is, he would be very proud of the young woman you've become." Sarah nodded and took a deep breath. "Before I sing," she said, "I want to say something. I'm not here asking for pity or charity. I'm here because I have talent, and I have a story that might help other people who feel lost or unwanted. But I'm also here because sometimes the universe puts you exactly where you need to be, exactly when you need to be there." She began to sing, and from the first note, Simon knew this was something extraordinary. Her voice was rich and powerful, with an emotional depth that spoke to real pain and genuine hope. But it was the lyrics that made his blood run cold. "I've been walking in your shadow, though I've never seen your face, looking for the man who made me in every crowded place. They say I have your eyes, your stubborn will, your way with words, but all I have are questions and a hope that's never heard." Simon found himself gripping the edge of the judge's table as Sarah continued singing. Her voice, her mannerisms, even the way she moved her hands when she sang, were all triggering memories of a brief relationship he'd had 17 years ago with a young woman named Elizabeth Mitchell, a backing singer he'd worked with for just a few months before she disappeared from his life. "Was it fear that made you leave before you knew what I could be? Was it shame, or was it sorrow? Or just inability to see that love doesn't need perfection, just the courage to be true? I forgive the man who left me, though I've never heard from you." As Sarah sang about forgiveness and searching, Simon felt the pieces of an impossible puzzle falling into place. Elizabeth Mitchell had tried to contact him multiple times 18 years ago, but his assistants had dismissed her calls as attempts to get money or attention. He had been too busy, too focused on his career, too convinced that any woman claiming pregnancy was lying for financial gain. "I don't need your money or your fame or your spotlight. I just need to know I matter, that I'm worthy of your sight. If you're out there somewhere listening, if you recognize my voice, please know that finding you has always been my choice." The final notes of Sarah's song hung in the air like a prayer, and the auditorium erupted in applause. But Simon wasn't clapping. He was staring at Sarah with an expression of growing horror and recognition, his mind racing through the mathematical impossibility of what he was beginning to suspect. "Sarah," Simon said, his voice strangely tight, that was extraordinary. Can I ask you something personal?" Sarah nodded, clutching her envelope. "Your mother's name, was it Elizabeth Mitchell?" The question hit the auditorium like a lightning bolt. The other judges looked at Simon in confusion, clearly wondering how he could possibly know that information. Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she nodded. "You knew my mother," she whispered. Simon stood up from his chair, something he rarely did during auditions. "Sarah, I need you to tell me your exact birth date." "March 15th, 2008, Sarah replied, her voice barely audible. Simon felt the world tilt on its axis. The timeline was perfect, the features were unmistakable, and the terrible realization was hitting him like a physical blow. "Sarah," he said, his voice shaking now, "I think I might be your father." The studio erupted in chaos. The audience gasped collectively, the other judges sat in stunned silence, and Sarah stared at Simon with an expression of complete shock mixed with a hope she had carried her entire life. "What are you saying?" Heidi asked, clearly struggling to process what was happening. Simon walked around the judges' table and approached the stage, his professional demeanor completely abandoned. "Sarah, your mother Elizabeth and we had a brief relationship 17 years ago. She tried to contact me multiple times, but God help me, I thought she was lying. I thought it was just another attempt to get money." Sarah pulled the envelope from her chest with trembling hands. Mr. Cowell, I have DNA test results in this envelope. I've been carrying them for months, hoping for a chance to compare them to yours." Simon stared at the envelope as if it contained his entire future. "How did you get my DNA for comparison?" Sarah's smile was sad but determined. "You drink from water bottles during tapings. They get thrown away. Security footage shows which bottles you used. It wasn't difficult for a private investigator to retrieve samples." The implication that Sarah had been planning this moment for months, that she had gone to extraordinary lengths to find the truth, hit Simon with the force of a freight train. "You've been investigating me. I've been searching for my father my entire life," Sarah replied. "When I turned 16, I hired a private investigator with money I saved from part-time jobs. We narrowed it down to 3 possible men in the entertainment industry. You were the most likely candidate based on the timeline and my mother's work history." Simon stepped onto the stage, breaking every protocol that existed for AGT auditions. "Sarah, if those test results prove what I think they're going to prove, then I owe you the biggest apology of my life." Sarah handed him the envelope with shaking hands. "Mr. Cowell, I need you to know that I'm not here asking for anything except acknowledgement. I don't want your money or your fame. I just want to know who I am." Simon opened the envelope and read the DNA analysis results. The paper shook in his hands as he saw the conclusive evidence. 99.97% probability of paternal relationship. He looked up at Sarah, his daughter, and felt 16 years of missed birthdays, missed milestones, missed opportunities to be a father crash down on him all at once. "Oh my God," Simon whispered. "Sarah, you're my daughter. You're really my daughter." The confirmation of what both of them had suspected still sent shockwaves through the studio. Sarah began crying in earnest now, and Simon reached out to embrace her for the first time in her life. "I'm sorry," Simon said through his own tears. "I'm so sorry I wasn't there for you. I'm sorry your mother had to raise you alone. I'm sorry you spent 16 years in foster care when you should have been with your family." Sarah pulled back to look at him through her tears. "You couldn't have known. Mother never told me she tried to contact you. I only found out when I read her journals after she died." Simon's heart broke all over again. "Elizabeth is dead," Sarah nodded. "Cancer, 3 years ago. She never married, never had other children. She always said I was enough family for her, but I think she was just protecting me from the disappointment of rejection." Simon felt the weight of 17 years of missed opportunities crushing down on him. "Sarah, I want you to know that if I had known about you, if I had taken your mother's calls seriously, everything would have been different. I would have been there." "I know," Sarah said simply. "That's why I forgave you before I even met you. The song I just sang, it was about forgiveness, not anger. I learned a long time ago that hate hurts the person carrying it more than the person it's aimed at." Simon looked at this remarkable young woman who had somehow found the strength to forgive him for abandoning her before he even knew she existed. "Sarah, what happens now? What do you want from me?" Sarah's answer was simple and heartbreaking. "I want to get to know my father. I want to learn about the family I never had. And I want you to be proud of me, not because of what you can give me, but because of who I've become despite everything." Simon turned to address the cameras and the audience, his voice thick with emotion. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you've just witnessed is the most important moment of my life. This remarkable young woman is my daughter Sarah, and I've spent 16 years not knowing she existed." He looked back at Sarah. "You asked if I'm proud of you. Sarah, I've never been more proud of anything in my life. You're strong, talented, forgiving, and wise beyond your years. You've turned pain into art, abandonment into strength, and uncertainty into hope." The audience gave them a standing ovation that lasted for several minutes, but Simon and Sarah were oblivious to everything except each other. They stood together on the AGT stage, a father and daughter meeting for the first time, surrounded by the chaos of a moment that would change both their lives forever. "Sarah," Simon said as the applause died down, "obviously you're going through to the next round. But more importantly, you're coming home with me. You're never going to be alone again." Sarah smiled through her tears. "Does this mean I have a family now?" "It means," Simon said, wrapping his arms around his daughter, "that you've always had a family. We just finally found each other." The episode that aired 6 weeks later became the most watched program in AGT history, garnering over 100 million views within the first week. But for Simon and Sarah, the real story was just beginning. Sarah moved to Los Angeles and into Simon's Malibu home, where they spent months getting to know each other and building the relationship they should have had from the beginning. Simon arranged for the best private tutors to help Sarah catch up on the education she had missed while in foster care, and he provided her with vocal coaching and songwriting mentors. But perhaps most importantly, Simon learned how to be a father. Sarah taught him about patience, about unconditional love, about the joy of putting someone else's needs before his own. She showed him photographs of her childhood, told him stories about her experiences in foster care, and slowly helped him understand the remarkable person she had become despite growing up without him. "I used to watch you on television," Sarah told him during one of their many long conversations in those first months. "I would wonder if you could be my father, but I never really believed it was possible. You seemed too successful, too important to have a daughter living in the foster care system." "Success doesn't mean anything if you don't have family to share it with," Simon replied. "I've spent my entire life building a career, but I never built a legacy. You are my legacy, Sarah. You're the best thing I've ever been responsible for, even if I didn't know I was responsible for you." 6 months after their reunion, Sarah returned to AGT for the finals. She performed a new song she had written called Found, about the journey from abandonment to belonging. The performance was flawless, but more importantly, it was authentic, the song of someone who had truly found her place in the world. Simon watched from the judges' table, no longer just a judge but a proud father witnessing his daughter's moment of triumph. When Sarah finished her performance, he stood and applauded, tears streaming down his face. "Sarah," he said into his microphone, "watching you perform tonight, I'm reminded that the best surprises in life aren't the ones we plan for. They're the ones that find us when we need them most. You didn't just find your father when you walked onto this stage, you found your home. Sarah won AGT that season, but her real victory was much larger than any competition. Her story sparked national conversations about foster care reform, the importance of family reunification, and the power of forgiveness. She used her platform to advocate for children in care and to raise awareness about the challenges faced by young people aging out of the system. But perhaps most importantly, Sarah and Simon proved that it's never too late for family to find each other. Their story became a symbol of hope for anyone who had ever felt lost or unwanted, demonstrating that love, forgiveness, and determination could overcome even the most challenging circumstances. Simon often said that finding Sarah changed his understanding of what success really meant. "I thought I was successful because I had built an entertainment empire," he would say in interviews. "But I wasn't successful until I became Sarah's father. Everything else is just business. She is my life." And Sarah, who had spent 16 years wondering who she was and where she belonged, finally had her answer. She was Simon Cowell's daughter. But more than that, she was exactly who she was supposed to be, a remarkable young woman who had turned a search for identity into a platform for helping others, and who had proven that the strongest families are sometimes the ones that find each other against all odds.